The morning fog had barely lifted when Dr. Eleanor Vance walked through the double doors of the Hilldale University Research Building. The halls were quiet, most of her colleagues still at home with their first cups of coffee. She preferred it this way. The stillness helped her think. Today wasn't just any Monday. It was the day she would finally propose the idea that had kept her awake for months. Elena had spent 15 years studying people who had been clinically dead before doctors brought them back. She'd collected hundreds of stories from these patients, descriptions of floating above their bodies, moving through tunnels of light, meeting loved ones who had passed away years earlier. The stories were remarkably similar, even from people in different countries and cultures. But stories weren't enough for science. Elena needed evidence. She reached her office and set down her worn leather bag. Through the window, she could see the university cemetery in the distance, its old stones standing like silent watchers. That view had sparked her idea one sleepless night 3 months ago. At exactly 9:30, 4 people filed into the small conference room, her research team. There was Robert, the neurologist whose gray hair never seemed to stay combed. Pryor, the brilliant young engineer who could build almost anything. Chris, the data analyst who rarely spoke but caught details everyone else missed. And Lee, the medical ethicist who asked the hard questions no one else wanted to face. "Thanks for coming," Eleanor said, closing the door. She took a deep breath. "What I'm about to propose will sound strange, maybe even disturbing. But I need you to hear me out completely before you react." 4 pairs of eyes watched her intently. "For years, we've collected testimonials about what happens when people die and come back, but we need more than stories." She clicked her presentation remote, and an image of a coffin appeared on the wall screen. "We need to see what actually happens after death." The room fell completely silent. "I'm proposing we create a special coffin with hidden cameras and sensors inside. Ultra-small, completely undetectable. We'd need a volunteer, someone already facing death who wants to contribute to science in their final moments." Robert broke the silence first. "You want to record, inside a coffin, after someone has died?" "Exactly," Eleanor nodded. "The cameras would activate once the person's heart stops. They'd record for 72 hours. Pryor leaned forward. "It's technically possible. We could use the micro cameras from our cell research, modify them for low light. Battery life would be the challenge, but I think we could manage 3 days." Chris spoke up, surprising everyone. "What exactly are we looking for?" Eleanor appreciated the direct question. "Anything unexplained. Movement, light, energy readings that don't match what we know about biological processes after death. If consciousness somehow continues or transforms, these instruments might catch something." "The ethics committee will never approve this," Lee said, shaking his head. "Think about it, recording someone's remains. The family backlash could end all our careers." "That's why we'd need complete consent," Eleanor replied, "from the volunteer and their family. Full transparency about the research goals." The discussion lasted hours. They argued about scientific merit, ethical boundaries, and practical challenges. By lunchtime, Robert and Pryor were cautiously on board. Chris wanted more details about data collection. Lee remained deeply concerned but agreed to help draft an ethical framework. "If, and that's a huge if, we get approval," Lee said, "finding a willing participant will be nearly impossible." Eleanor looked out the window toward the cemetery again. "Someone will understand what we're trying to do. Someone will want to help us learn the truth." As they left the conference room, Eleanor felt lighter than she had in months. The path ahead would be difficult, filled with obstacles and criticism from other scientists. But for the first time, her idea had left the confines of her mind. It had become real. What she didn't know then was how this experiment would change everything, not just for science, but for how humans understand the final frontier that awaits us all. 3 months after Dr. Eleanor's proposal, the University Ethics Committee finally gave their approval with strict conditions. Finding a volunteer seemed impossible until Eleanor received a phone call that changed everything. "Dr. Vance, my name is Thomas Blackwood. I read about your research in the Science Journal." Eleanor gripped her phone tighter. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood. How can I help you?" "I think I might be able to help you, actually." His voice was steady despite what he said next. "I've been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors say I have about 2 months. Elena sat down slowly in her office chair. I'm very sorry to hear that. Don't be. I've had a good life, 70 years of it, but I'd like my death to mean something. There was a pause. I was a physicist before I retired. Science has been my whole life. I want to contribute one last time. 2 weeks later, Thomas Blackwood sat across from Eleanor and her team in the university lab. In person, he looked thinner than in the photo he'd sent, his white beard neatly trimmed against pale skin. But his blue eyes were sharp and alert. So do you want to put cameras in my coffin, he said, getting straight to the point. To see what happens after I'm gone. Robert nodded. 6 micro cameras and various sensors. They're so small you wouldn't notice them if I showed you. And what exactly are you hoping to find? Thomas asked, looking directly at Eleanor. She appreciated his directness. Honestly, we don't know. Maybe nothing at all. But there's so much we don't understand about what happens in those moments after death. People who've been revived report experiences that science can't explain. Thomas smiled slightly. I've always been a skeptic about that sort of thing. That's actually perfect, Pryor said. We need someone who doesn't have strong beliefs that might influence the results. They spent hours going through the details. Thomas asked tough questions about the technology, the data security, and what would happen to his remains afterward. Lee carefully explained all the ethical safeguards they'd put in place. At one point, Thomas pulled a photograph from his wallet. A young woman with his same blue eyes. My daughter, Sophia, he explained. We haven't been close for years. Different views on just about everything, but I've told her about this. She's not happy, but she respects that it's my choice. Chris, who rarely spoke, asked the question they'd all been wondering. Aren't you afraid? Of what might happen after? Thomas looked thoughtful. I spent my life believing that when we die, that's it, lights out. But I've always followed the evidence. If there's something more, he shrugged. Wouldn't you want to know? Over the next few weeks, Thomas became a regular at the lab. He watched as Pryor built the special coffin, lined with undetectable equipment. The cameras were designed to activate upon confirmed cardiac arrest and would record for 72 hours using specially designed long-life batteries. As Thomas's health declined, he moved into hospice care at the university hospital. The team visited him daily, sometimes to check details about the experiment, but mostly just to talk. Eleanor found herself looking forward to these visits. Thomas had stories from his years of research that made them all laugh, even as his body grew weaker. One evening, as Eleanor was leaving, Thomas called her back. I've been thinking, he said, his voice now much softer than when they first met. What if you do see something? What if there's more than just darkness? Eleanor sat beside his bed. Then we'll have changed our understanding of life and death forever. He nodded slowly. And if you see nothing, then we'll know a little more than we did before. That's how science works, one question at a time. Thomas smiled and closed his eyes, tired from the conversation. 2 great mysteries left, Eleanor, what happens after we die, and why my daughter never liked the birthday cakes I baked her. As she left his room, Eleanor felt the weight of his trust. Soon Thomas would be gone, and their experiment would begin. But first, they had to prepare for the hardest part, saying goodbye to the man who'd become not just their subject, but their friend. Rain tapped gently against the hospice windows on the day Thomas Blackwood took his final breath. The sky outside was the color of wet slate, as if nature itself had dressed for the occasion. Dr. Eleanor and her team had been taking shifts at the hospice for 3 days. Thomas's condition had worsened rapidly over the weekend. The nurses said it wouldn't be long now. Eleanor sat beside his bed, reading aloud from a book about quantum physics that Thomas had requested. Her voice was the only sound in the room besides the soft peep of the heart monitor and the rain. You don't have to pretend that's interesting, Thomas whispered, his eyes still closed. Eleanor smiled. Actually, I'm learning quite a bit about particle entanglement. Thomas's eyes opened slightly, always the student. His breathing had become shallow, each inhale a visible effort. Is everyone ready? Yes, Eleanor assured him. Everything's in place, just as we planned. Thomas nodded slightly. And Sophia? She arrived an hour ago. She's getting coffee with Pryor. Do you want me to get her? Please. Eleanor stepped into the hallway and found Sophia, a woman in her 30s with her father's same thoughtful eyes, though hers were red from crying. When Eleanor explained Thomas was asking for her, Sophia didn't hesitate. "I'll stay outside," Eleanor said as Sophia entered the room. This moment wasn't for science, it was for family. 20 minutes later, Sophia emerged, tears streaming down her face, but with a calmness that hadn't been there before. "He wants to speak with all of you now." The team gathered around Thomas's bed. His breathing was even more labored now, but he was determined to speak. "Remember," he managed, "whatever you see, or don't see, it's all valuable data." He tried to smile. "Just promise me one thing." "Anything," Robert said, his usual professional distance forgotten. "Don't let the university bury the results, no matter what you find." They all nodded solemnly. "And take care of Sophia. She's agreed to be your liaison with the family." His eyes sought out his daughter, who stood in the doorway. "She's stronger than she knows." At 11:42 a.m., with his daughter holding one hand and Eleanor holding the other, Thomas Blackwood's heart monitor flatlined. The nurse came in, checked his vital signs, and officially pronounced his death at 11:45 a.m. What followed was a carefully choreographed process that had been planned for weeks. The funeral home had been selected specifically because they'd agreed to cooperate with the research project. No embalming would take place at Thomas's request and to preserve the natural processes the team wanted to observe. Thomas's body was placed in the special coffin under the watchful eyes of both the funeral director and Dr. Eleanor's team. The cameras and sensors were verified one final time. Once activated, they would transmit data to the university lab's secure servers. The funeral was held the next day. Despite the rain, nearly 50 people came, former colleagues, neighbors, and students who remembered the brilliant physics professor who had mentored them years ago. Sophia delivered a eulogy that was both heartbreaking and hopeful. "My father lived for questions," she said, her voice steady. Even at the end, he was still asking them, still looking for answers. "That's how I'll remember him, never satisfied with 'I don't know.'" After the service, as the small group of mourners gathered at the cemetery, only Eleanor, her team, and Sophia knew what was really happening as the coffin was lowered into the ground. Inside that wooden box, invisible to everyone, 6 tiny cameras had just activated, beginning their silent watch. Back at the university lab, the monitors came to life, showing the interior of the coffin from various angles. The transmission system worked perfectly. The data was coming through clearly. "And now we wait," Eleanor said softly. For the first several hours, they took turns watching the monitors. Everything was exactly as expected, dark, still, unchanging. By evening, they had set up an automated system to alert them if anything unusual was detected, and they all went home exhausted. None of them slept well that night. Eleanor kept checking her phone, half expecting an alert, though she knew any significant changes would take time. As a scientist, she had prepared herself for the likelihood that they would observe nothing unusual at all. What she couldn't have prepared for was what would begin to happen 30 hours later. For the first 30 hours, the lab was quiet except for the soft hum of computers and the occasional sipping of coffee. The team worked in shifts, with at least 2 people monitoring the data at all times. So far, they had recorded exactly what everyone expected: darkness, stillness, and the beginning stages of natural decomposition. Dr. Eleanor had just arrived for the morning shift when Pryor called her over to her workstation. "I've been tracking the temperature readings," Pryor said, pointing to a graph on her screen. "Look at this pattern." Eleanor leaned in, pushing her glasses up her nose. The line on the screen showed small but regular fluctuations in temperature inside the coffin. "Could be equipment error," Eleanor suggested, though she didn't really believe it. "Their sensors were too precise for that." "I thought so too," Pryor replied. "So I checked all 6 sensors. They're all showing the same pattern." She pulled up another screen. "And it's not matching the external soil temperature. Something inside the coffin is causing these changes." Robert joined them, carrying his 3rd cup of coffee of the morning. When Pryor explained what they were seeing, he shrugged. "Natural biochemical processes during decomposition release heat. It's probably just happening in waves." "Maybe," Pryor said, but she didn't sound convinced. "But I've never seen such regular patterns before." By late afternoon, Chris had created a program to analyze the temperature fluctuations. "It's almost like a pulse," he said quietly. Every 8 to 10 minutes, the temperature rises by half a degree, then falls again. They all knew what it sounded like, but no one wanted to say it. A pulse, a heartbeat, but that was impossible. Let's stick to what we can prove, Eleanor reminded them. Document everything, but don't jump to conclusions. As night fell, Lee arrived to take the overnight shift with Chris. Elena was about to leave when Chris called out from his monitoring station. Camera 3 is picking up something. They all rushed over. On the screen, the interior of the coffin was still dark, but there was something different, a faint, almost imperceptible glow near where Thomas's chest would be. Adjust the contrast, Eleanor instructed. Chris typed commands, and the image cleared slightly. There was definitely a soft light there, barely visible, but unmistakable. Could be phosphorescence, Robert suggested. Some bacteria give off light during decomposition. Not this kind of light, Pryor countered. And not in this pattern. They watched as the glow pulsed slightly, matching the timing of the temperature fluctuations they'd been tracking. By hour 40, 2 more cameras had picked up similar light sources, and the temperature patterns had become even more pronounced. The team set up additional analyzing tools, working frantically to document and understand what they were seeing. I need to call Sophia, Eleanor said finally. She should know what's happening. Are you sure that's a good idea? Lee asked. We don't even know what we're seeing yet. Eleanor looked back at the screens, where the mysterious glow was now slightly brighter. We promised to keep her informed. Besides, she's our family liaison. She has a right to know. When Sophia answered the phone, Eleanor could hear street noise in the background. Dr. Vance, is everything okay? Yes, everything's fine, Eleanor assured her. But we're seeing some unusual readings from the sensors. Nothing alarming, just unexpected. There was a pause. What kind of readings? Eleanor took a deep breath. Temperature fluctuations and some light phenomena that we can't immediately explain. Would you be able to come to the lab? Maybe tomorrow morning. I'm actually not far from campus, Sophia replied. I could come now, if that's okay. An hour later, Sophia stood in the lab, staring at the monitors. Her face was pale but composed as Chris explained what they were seeing. Could it be some kind of equipment malfunction? She asked. We've run diagnostics 3 times, Pryor explained. Everything's working perfectly. Sophia stepped closer to the main screen, where the glow pulsed softly. And what do you think it is? The scientists exchanged glances. None of them wanted to speculate wildly, especially in front of Thomas's daughter. Finally, Eleanor spoke carefully. We don't know yet. It could be several things. Chemical reactions, natural processes we don't fully understand. What we're doing now is gathering as much data as possible. Sophia didn't take her eyes off the screen. My father would be fascinated right now, she whispered. He always said the best moments in science are when you see something you can't explain. As if in response to her words, the glow on the screen pulsed brighter for a moment, then returned to its previous intensity. Everyone in the room noticed, but no one spoke. What would happen next would challenge everything they thought they knew about life and death. The lab door burst open without warning. Sophia stood there, her face flushed and her eyes wild. Why didn't anyone call me? She demanded, looking around at the team. I had to hear from the nurse at the front desk that something big was happening. Dr. Eleanor stepped forward. We were going to call you as soon as we understood what we're seeing. We didn't want to worry you unnecessarily. Sophia's anger faded slightly as she noticed the atmosphere in the room, the mix of excitement and fear on everyone's faces, the unusual silence. What's happened? Elena gestured to the main screen. We've been recording something unusual. The team gathered around as Chris pulled up the footage from the past few hours. Sophia watched, her expression changing from confusion to disbelief as she saw the misty shape forming above where her father's chest would be. What is that? She whispered. We don't know, Robert admitted. It started as just light and temperature changes, but in the last 8 hours it's become more defined. On the screen, the misty form moved slightly, shifting in ways that seemed almost deliberate. Have you enhanced this footage at all? Sophia asked, her voice steady despite the circumstances. No, Pryor answered quickly. This is the raw feed. We've been too afraid to mess with it. Sophia stepped closer to the screen, studying the movements. Play it again, she requested. Chris replayed the last 30 minutes of footage. As they all watched in silence, Sophia's hand slowly rose to her mouth. That gesture, she said, pointing to a particular movement of the misty form. The way it moves to the left and then makes that circular motion. My father used to do that when he was thinking. It was his thing. He'd wake his hand like that when he was working through a difficult problem. The scientists exchanged glances. They had noticed patterns in the movement, but hadn't connected them to Thomas's personal mannerisms. There's more, Eleanor said quietly. She nodded to Chris, who switched screens to show the audio analysis. We picked up vibrations, Chris explained. When we amplified them and ran them through our sound processing software, we got this. He pressed play. Through heavy static came broken fragments of sound, not quite words, but patterns that suggested speech. Most were unintelligible, but one sequence kept repeating. Can you isolate that repeated section? Sophia asked. Chris worked at his keyboard, filtering out more of the background noise. The sequence played again, clearer this time, 3 distinct sound patterns. Sophia went pale. That sounds like soft skyfall. What does that mean? Lee asked. Skyfall was what my father called our old cabin by the lake. When I was little, he'd say soft skyfall when it was time to go there for vacation. Her voice trembled. Nobody else ever called it that. It was just between us. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the soft hum of the computers. This has to be coincidence, Robert said finally. Or we're seeing patterns where none exist because we want to find meaning. Is that what you really think? Sophia challenged him. As a scientist, you've never seen anything like this before, have you? Robert couldn't meet her eyes. No, he admitted. I haven't. Just then, the lab phone rang, making everyone jump. Lee answered it and spoke briefly before hanging up with a worried expression. That was Dean Wilson's office. He wants to see all of us immediately. All of us? Pryor asked. The entire research team, Lee confirmed. His secretary sounded stressed. 20 minutes later, they sat in the dean's office. Dean Wilson, a thin man with permanent worry lines on his forehead, paced behind his desk. Do you have any idea what you've done? He asked without preamble. The ethics committee chairman got wind of your so-called findings and is threatening to shut down the entire department. But we followed all the protocols, Eleanor protested. We had full approval. For a scientific study, yes, the dean snapped. Not for claiming to have discovered, what? The human soul. Life after death. We haven't claimed anything, Eleanor said firmly. We're simply recording what the instruments are showing us. The dean leaned forward, planting his hands on the desk. The university cannot be associated with this kind of sensationalism. This could damage our reputation, our funding, everything we've built. So, what are you saying? Pryor asked. I'm saying this project is over. You will remove your equipment, turn over all data to the university's review board, and sign confidentiality agreements. He straightened up. The official statement will be that the study was inconclusive and has been terminated. Sophia, who had been silent until now, stood up. That's not what my father wanted. He specifically asked that the results not be buried, no matter what was found. The dean looked at her almost sympathetically. Ms. Blackwood, I understand you're grieving, but this isn't about your father anymore. This is about protecting the institution. As they left the dean's office, the team walked in stunned silence. Everything they had worked for, everything they had discovered, was about to be locked away. But Sophia and Eleanor exchanged a look that said this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Late that night, the research team gathered at Dr. Eleanor's small house on the edge of town. Rain tapped against the windows as they sat in her living room, the atmosphere tense with the weight of their decision. We need to talk about what happens next, Eleanor said, looking around at the tired faces of her colleagues. Robert spoke first. The dean was clear. If we don't follow his orders, we could all lose our jobs, everything we've worked for. And if we do follow his orders, we lose something more important, Sophia countered. She had barely spoken on the drive from campus, but now her voice was firm. The truth. Lee, always the ethical compass of the group, sighed heavily. I keep thinking about what your father said, that the results shouldn't be buried. But we also have a responsibility to the university. Do we? Pryor asked unexpectedly. I thought our responsibility was to science, to discovery. They fell silent, the only sound the soft patter of rain and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. What if we're wrong? Chris asked quietly. What if what we're seeing is just, I don't know, some natural process we don't understand yet? We could damage our careers over nothing. Eleanor walked to her desk and opened her laptop. Before we decide anything, you should see the latest data. They gathered around as she pulled up the footage from the most recent hours. The misty form had become even more defined, its movements more deliberate. And there was something new. Camera 6, positioned near Thomas's face, had captured something none of them had seen yet. I downloaded this just before the dean called us in, Eleanor explained. Watch carefully. On the screen, in the dim glow created by the mysterious light, Thomas's lips appeared to move slightly. It was subtle, just the faintest movement, but unmistakable. Could be natural muscle contractions, Robert suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. We ran it through motion analysis software, Eleanor said. It's consistent and repetitive. The same pattern over and over. Like he's trying to say something, Sophia whispered. Pryor, who had been working on her tablet, looked up. I sent the footage to a friend who specializes in lip reading. I didn't tell her where it came from, just that we needed to know what was being said. And? Lee prompted. Pryor held up her tablet, showing the email she'd just received. She says it looks like 2 words, repeated, consciousness endures. The room fell completely silent. My father was a scientist to his core, Sophia said finally. He believed in evidence, in sharing knowledge. Whatever this is, whether it's proof of something beyond death or just some biological process we don't understand, he would want people to know. Eleanor nodded slowly. I think you're right, but we need to be careful about how we do this. We can't just dump the raw footage online without context. Over the next 2 days, they worked tirelessly. Eleanor wrote a detailed paper explaining their methods, the controls they had put in place, and the unexplained phenomena they had recorded. Pryor prepared the data files, making sure everything was properly documented. Robert and Chris compiled all the analyses they had run, showing that they had explored every possible conventional explanation. The university, meanwhile, had started the process to formally shut down the project. Security guards had been posted outside the lab, and the dean had called each team member individually, pressuring them to sign the confidentiality agreements. None of them did. On the morning of the 7th day after Thomas's death, just as the recording equipment's batteries were dying, Eleanor submitted their paper to an independent scientific journal known for its rigorous standards. At the same time, Sophia uploaded selected footage to a secure website, along with explanations of what viewers were seeing. The scientific community exploded with reactions. Many dismissed the evidence immediately, calling it a hoax or a misinterpretation of natural decomposition processes. Others called for new studies to replicate the findings. A few brave scientists spoke out in support, saying the data couldn't be explained by current scientific understanding. 3 weeks later, under intense public pressure and scrutiny from other research institutions, the university agreed to allow Thomas's coffin to be exhumed. The cameras and sensors were removed and subjected to intensive analysis by independent experts. No evidence of tampering or data manipulation was found. Today, 5 years later, similar studies have been conducted in research centers around the world. Some have reported similar phenomena. Others have found nothing unusual. The debate continues in scientific journals and conferences. As for Sophia, she established a foundation in her father's name to fund research into consciousness. Every year on his birthday, she visits his grave, now marked with a simple stone bearing his name, his dates, and the 2 words that changed how many people think about the greatest mystery of all. Consciousness endures.